The United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire in a deal that includes the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Israel launched multiple airstrikes on Lebanon, claiming the 2-week Iran ceasefire does not apply to the country. The left MEP Mark Botenga said the EU did no diplomatic effort to end the war in Iran in Euronews flagship program Europe Today.
President Emmanuel Macron welcomed 2 French nationals who returned to Paris after spending almost 4 years detained in Iran.
FIFA has opened disciplinary proceedings against Spain's Football Federation after Islamophobic chants were made during a friendly game against Egypt last month.
The United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire late on Tuesday, as U.S. President Donald Trump held off on his threatened attacks on Iranian bridges and power plants, in a deal that includes the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Supreme National Security Council said it has accepted the ceasefire and that it would negotiate with the United States in Islamabad beginning Friday. Neither Iran nor the United States said when the ceasefire would begin, and even as it was announced, missile alerts continued across the Gulf and Israel kept up its strikes on Iran. Israel said it also agreed to the ceasefire but added that it does not include Lebanon, contradicting statements from Pakistan's Prime Minister, a key mediator, that Israel and Hezbollah would also cease their fighting. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said passage through the Strait of Hormuz would be allowed under Iranian military management. It wasn't immediately clear whether that meant Iran would completely loosen its chokehold on the waterway. In addition to control of the strait, Iran's demands for ending the war include withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the region, the lifting of sanctions, and the release of its frozen assets.
An Israeli strike over the southern Lebanese city of Sidon, launched without warning, has killed at least 8 people and injured 22 others during the night, Lebanon's health ministry said. Multiple Israeli airstrikes also hit the Lebanese capital of Beirut on Wednesday after the United States and Iran announced a 2-week ceasefire. Israel's military claimed it launched the largest coordinated strike of the war, targeting more than 100 Hezbollah targets within 10 minutes. Israel earlier said it backed the US-Iran ceasefire, but that the deal did not extend to Lebanon, although mediator Pakistan said it does. Displaced Lebanese families expressed confusion on Wednesday.
قالوا وقف اطلاق نار بايران اسبوعين هون ما بنعرف بعد بس برضه عم نغامر وعم ننزل على بيوتنا لانه مثل ما انك شايف ولا مي ولا كهرباء ولا شيء هون بس عبر ساندويشي اكل اكثر من هيك لا.
بحرب نحن ما لنا فيها، عرفت كيف؟ وما بعتقد عدل انه تخلص بالبلد اللي هي فيها ونحن نضل.
Israeli airstrikes have killed more than 1,500 people in Lebanon since the beginning of the war between Israel and the Hezbollah.
There's a sense of optimism and positivity here in the UAE this morning after what was a pretty tense and stressful day and night last night, leading up to the announcement of that temporary 2-week ceasefire. That said, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Doha and Saudi Arabia all issued alerts throughout the night warning of imminent attacks, and they came not long after the ceasefire agreement was decided upon. Of course, the question on everybody's lips is what happens after that 2-week period. With regards to the Strait of Hormuz, does this become a pump and dump scheme whereby ships are allowed to pass for that 2-week period? Then what happens after? Do the blockades return? And of course the stress and high tension that come with that. So a lot of questions still today, but I would say there is a sense of hope and optimism that this is the beginning, the start of reconciliation and peace across the region.
Oil prices fell sharply on Wednesday morning as European and Asian markets surged after the US and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire that includes reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Although traders remain cautious until the truth proves durable, markets reflected the newfound optimism that the conflict may cease. Brent crude stood at around $95 per barrel on Wednesday morning, up almost 30% since the war began in late February, but well below the peaks of recent weeks of $110 per barrel. The Euro Stoxx 50 was up more than 3% in early trading, while the broader pan-European Stoxx 600 was over 4% higher and eyeing the largest daily increase since April 2025. The worry that has stalked markets since late February still remains, namely that a prolonged disruption to Gulf oil flows will keep energy prices elevated long enough to push a fresh wave of inflation through the global economy, with or without a ceasefire.
Belgian MEP Mark Botenga welcomed the 2-week ceasefire agreed by the United States and Iran after the US President Donald Trump pulled back on his threats last night. But the MEP, who belongs to the left group in the European Parliament, was highly critical of the EU's response to the crisis.
The European Union has done nothing, no diplomatic efforts whatsoever for a crisis that not only is violating human rights, is violating international law, but was also violating our interests.
The 2-week ceasefire was first announced by President Trump, with Iran's Supreme National Security Council saying soon after that it would negotiate with the United States in the capital of Pakistan, Islamabad, beginning Friday. According to Botenga, the EU has failed to point out who the victim of the conflict is.
They should have condemned the war. They should have condemned the war crimes. You know, imagine that. You've got 160 people killed in a strike on a school in Iran, and the European Union is not able to condemn this. Imagine that. They should have condemned the genocidal rhetoric of President Trump last night, saying, I'm going to blow up a country, I'm going to end the civilization. Of course, you should react.
European Council President Antonio Costa had warned on Monday that striking civilian infrastructure and energy facilities in Iran would be illegal and unacceptable. A few hours after Trump's announcement, EU High Representative Kaja Kallas said the ceasefire is a step back from the brink.
President Emmanuel Macron welcomed 2 French nationals who returned to Paris on Wednesday after spending almost 4 years detained in Iran on espionage charges, with the French leader hailing the end of a terrible ordeal.
Je voulais d'abord vous dire à quel point nous sommes soulagés de revoir nos proches, à quel point ça a été un bonheur immense de les prendre dans nos bras enfin. Je voulais aussi exprimer ma reconnaissance vis-à-vis des services de l'État, donc bien sûr le président de la République, bien sûr le ministre des Affaires étrangères et tous les services qui se sont mobilisés, toutes les personnes qui se sont mobilisées jusqu'au bout pour nous faire sortir de l'enfer des vignes, où nous avons vécu l'horreur quotidienne, où nous avons vécu l'arbitraire permanent.
Cécile Kohler and Jacques Paris had been under house arrest at the French embassy in Tehran ever since being freed after 3 years in prison in November, with their fate even more uncertain after US-Israeli strikes on Iran started in February. They were arrested in May 2022 at the end of a trip to Iran that their families say was for tourism. At the end of a closed-door trial, an Iranian court in October sentenced them to jail on espionage charges their families say were fabricated. The pair were among a number of Europeans caught up in what activists and some Western governments describe as a deliberate strategy of hostage-taking by Iran to extract concessions from the West.
Taiwan's opposition leader Cheng Li-won is on a historic 6-day trip to Beijing to boost dialogue and promote peace. China claims the self-ruled island as its own territory and has not excluded the use of force to take it. Li-won's push for peace comes as Beijing has been ramping up its military pressure against the island by regularly sending warplanes and naval vessels near it.
我们应该共同致力于促进两岸的和解与团结，创造区域的繁荣与和平。
Li-won's visit comes ahead of a heavily anticipated summit between US President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. The Trump administration announced in December a massive deal with Taiwan, valued at more than 9.4 billion euros, which includes medium-range missiles, howitzers and drones. Beijing has repeatedly criticized Washington's weapons sales to Taiwan and warned Washington against interfering in what it deems as its domestic affairs.
FIFA says it has opened disciplinary proceedings against the Spanish Football Federation after Islamophobic chants were made by Spanish fans during a game against Egypt last month. Spanish fans were heard chanting, quote, "Who doesn't jump is a Muslim," during the pre-World Cup friendly game, which ended in a 0-0 draw. Announcements over the stadium's PA system and screens displayed anti-racism slogans and called for respect during the match, but the chanting continued. The chants drew condemnation from Spain and Barcelona superstar Lamine Yamal, who's a practicing Muslim himself. Yamal acknowledged that the chants hurt him, even though they weren't directed at him. In a post on Instagram after the match, the 18-year-old winger labeled those who use religion as a mockery as, quote, "ignorant and racist." Spain manager Luis de la Fuente also condemned what he called intolerable behavior in the post-match press conference, adding that it doesn't represent the country or national team. Separate from the FIFA proceedings, Spanish police announced that it has launched its own probe into the incident, which is being handled by the Hate Crime and Discrimination Unit. Spain's Foreign Minister Jose Alvarez conveyed his apologies and condemnation of the fans' behavior to his Egyptian counterpart Badr Abdelati. The top Egyptian diplomat denounced the xenophobic remarks, but emphasized that they view Spain as a tolerant and pluralistic country.